Rome crucified people by the tens of thousands. 6,000 on a single highway after Spartacus, 2,000 outside Jerusalem in 4 BC, 500 a day during one siege, and the total number of crucified skeletons archaeologists have ever found, from the entire ancient world, is 2. And we only have the first one because an executioner's nail hit a knot in the wood and bent. Stakes first. Before anyone invented crucifixion, the ancient world was already big on stakes. Hammurabi's code, back in the 1700s BC, prescribed impalement for a wife who plotted her husband's death. The Assyrians turned it into wall art. The Lachish reliefs in the British Museum, carved around 700 BC, show 3 men impaled on stakes outside a conquered city, and the tallest stake was reserved for the city's governor. Even in atrocity, middle management gets the short pole. But impalement and crucifixion are different inventions, and the difference is the whole point. Impalement kills in minutes and displays a corpse. Crucifixion keeps a living person on display, dying slowly, in public, for hours or days. Somebody looked at the fastest execution in the ancient world and asked how to make it last longer. That is the innovation this whole story is about. The Hebrew Bible knows the older version too. Deuteronomy allows an executed criminal to be hanged on a tree, but insists the body come down and be buried before nightfall because a hanged man is under God's curse. In its original context, that meant displaying a corpse, not killing by suspension. Centuries later, a legal text found among the Dead Sea Scrolls quietly flips the reading and prescribes hanging as the method itself, for traitors. The idea was spreading, and that burial before nightfall rule is going to matter enormously near the end of this story, so file it away. There's also a genuine translation problem, and historians still fight about it. The Greek word stauros and the Latin word crux just meant stake or pole. The verbs meant to suspend on something. So when an ancient text says a king crucified his enemies, the original might mean impaled, tied up, nailed, or hung up already dead, and often we simply cannot tell. Scholars have spent centuries quietly rounding suspended somehow up to crucified. Keep that asterisk in mind, because the very first famous case comes with one attached. Persia lifts people up. The conventional origin story starts with Persia. When Babylon revolted around 519 BC, King Darius took the city back and, according to Herodotus, executed 3,000 of its leading citizens by hoisting them on stakes. Popular history books call this the first mass crucifixion. The Greek verb Herodotus used, though, means impale, so history's most cited first crucifixion is probably a mistranslated mass impalement, which tells you a lot about how careful everyone has been with this topic. What we do have from Persia is a king bragging in the first person. On the Behistun inscription, carved into an Iranian cliffside around 520 BC, Darius proudly lists what he did to rebel leaders. Cut off the nose, ears, and tongue of a rebel named Phraortes, put out one of his eyes, chained him at the palace gate for public viewing, then impaled him at Ecbatana. Another rebel, who had claimed Babylon's throne, went up on a stake in Babylon itself. This is not enemy propaganda. This is the man's own press release, in 3 languages, on a cliff. Herodotus also gives suspension its first celebrity. Polycrates, the tyrant of Samos, was lured to the mainland around 522 BC by a Persian governor, killed in some way Herodotus refuses to describe, and then hung up on display where the rain washed him and the sun anointed him, fulfilling a dream that had made his daughter beg him not to go. Note the order of operations though: killed first, displayed after. Suspension began its career as something you did to a corpse to keep humiliating it. Doing it to the living was still in development, and Persian suspension had one feature no Roman cross would ever offer: a refund policy. Herodotus tells of Sandosis, a royal judge caught taking a bribe, who was strung up for execution. Mid-execution, Darius ran the numbers, decided the man's good services outweighed the crime, and had him taken down alive. He went on to a governorship. Remember Sandosis, because coming down from a cross-breathing is about to become the rarest event in this entire story. Greece holds its nose. The classical Greeks considered execution by suspension a barbarian habit, meaning a Persian one, and mostly refused to do it. Athens preferred hemlock, a fatal pit, or a device called apotympanismos, where the condemned was clamped to a board with iron collars at the neck, wrists, and ankles, and left to die. Archaeologists found 17 men still fastened to boards in a mass grave at Phaleron, near Athens. So the Greeks did have their own slow public suspension death. They just felt very superior about the fact that it involved no nails. The high ground didn't survive contact with anger. Herodotus ends his entire histories with Athenians nailing a Persian governor, Artites, to a plank for desecrating a temple. The punishment they supposedly didn't do deployed in the last paragraph of the book. And in 332 BC, Alexander the Great, the self-appointed avenger of Greece against Persia, spent 7 months besieging the island city of Tyre, building a causeway across open sea to reach it. The Tyrians had executed Macedonian prisoners on the walls, in full view of his army. So when the city fell, Alexander killed thousands in the sack, sold 30,000 people into slavery, and crucified 2,000 of the surviving men along the beach. Those figures come from writers working centuries later, so treat them as ancient historian numbers. But the pattern is solid. The punishment Greeks called barbaric got adopted the moment a city annoyed somebody enough. Tyre, by the way, was a Phoenician city, and Phoenician Tyre had a famous colonial daughter, Carthage. Which brings us to the strangest chapter in this story. Carthage crucifies its generals. Every ancient power crucified its enemies. Carthage crucified its own executives. Under the Carthaginian constitution, losing a battle could be prosecuted as a capital crime, and the court of 104 judges handed out the cross for military incompetence. In 308 BC, the general Bomilcar was crucified in the middle of the marketplace, and Diodorus reports he used the elevation to deliver a speech denouncing the government, which is the most committed exit interview in history. In 264 BC, the commander Hanno was crucified for withdrawing a garrison without a fight. In 258 BC, the admiral Hannibal Gisco was crucified by his own mutinous crews after a botched naval operation, no court required. Another general, Hasdrubal, was condemned after failing to retake a city in 250 BC. Roman writers even claimed the practice went back to Carthage's founding era, with a general crucifying his own son in his priestly robes. That one is probably legend, but nobody doubted Carthage would do it, which is its own kind of evidence. Accountability for executives, with consequences. Modern shareholders can only dream. And it matters for the origin story, because Rome started crucifying people at exactly the time and place it started fighting Carthage. Sicily, 264 BC onward. Rome already had an old punishment called the arbor infélix, the unlucky tree, a vague scourge, and hang ritual for traitors, but the standard scholarly view is that contact with Carthage upgraded Roman practice into true crucifixion. Rome picked up the cross from its worst enemy, and then ran it at a scale Carthage never dreamed of, the slave's punishment. Rome's official name for crucifixion was servile supplicium, the slave's punishment, and the branding was the point. It was for slaves, pirates, bandits, rebels, deserters, and eventually anyone sufficiently lower class. A Roman citizen could be beheaded for treason but never crucified, and when the governor Verres broke that rule in 70 BC, it ended his career. He crucified a citizen named Gavius at Messana, a man who screamed, "Civis Romanus sum, I am a Roman citizen," between lashes. Verres even placed the cross on the shoreline facing Italy, so Gavius could look at the homeland whose laws were failing him while he died. Cicero prosecuted, called crucifixion the most cruel and disgusting of penalties, and Verres fled into exile before the verdict. Cicero's summary of Roman feeling has survived 2,000 years. The very word cross, he said, should be far removed not just from a citizen's body, but from his thoughts, his eyes, and his ears. The word itself was dirty. In the comedies of Plautus, slaves tell each other to go to the bad cross, the way we'd say go to hell, and crux, doubled as slang for misery, for torment, and at least once for an unpleasant person. Plautus's slave characters treat the cross as their scheduled retirement plan. One calls himself a future crucicelus, a cross dancer, a pun so dark scholars needed a moment before laughing. Another expects to rest where his father and grandfather rest, on the cross. Gallows humor isn't a modern invention. It's what people build when the gallows is a certainty. The cross was a swear word for centuries before it was ever a sacred symbol. English still carries the scar. Excruciating comes from the Latin excruciare, literally, out of the cross. Every time you call a headache excruciating, you are, etymologically, comparing it to crucifixion. The Romans built the pain benchmark of Western language and named it after their worst machine, industrial scale. The numbers are the part your history class skipped. In 88 BC, Alexander Jannaeus, a Jewish king and high priest, crucified 800 Pharisee rebels in the middle of Jerusalem, and Josephus adds that he watched from a banquet with his concubines while the victims' families were killed in front of them. A scroll found at Qumran calls him the Lion of Wrath, who hanged men alive, a thing never before done in Israel. That's 120 years before Jesus, and it wasn't Romans doing it. Rome just brought scale. After Spartacus's revolt collapsed in 71 BC, Crassus crucified about 6,000 prisoners along the Appian Way from Capua to Rome. Do the math on 200 kilometers of highway, and you get a dying man roughly every 35 meters, for the entire road, left up for years as a billboard. Spartacus himself was never crucified, whatever the movie implied. His body was never found at all. Crassus, for his part, didn't even get a triumph for the victory. Rome granted him the lesser honor, an ovation, because defeating slaves didn't count as beating a real enemy. In 4 BC, after the unrest that followed Herod's death, the Roman general Varus crucified 2,000 rebels around Jerusalem, and during the siege of Jerusalem in 70 AD, Josephus, an eyewitness, says Roman soldiers caught up to 500 starving refugees a day and crucified them in view of the walls, nailing them in different postures for their own amusement, until there was not enough room for the crosses, nor enough crosses for the bodies. An army can run out of wood before it runs out of cruelty. Josephus also gives us the only documented survival in the entire ancient record. Riding past a batch of crucified prisoners, he recognized 3 old acquaintances, went to Titus in tears, and got all 3 taken down immediately and treated by the best physicians in the camp. 2 of them died anyway. Sesterces would have appreciated the odds. Even with imperial doctors and the general's personal sympathy, coming down alive worked 1 time in 3. The procedure. Here's what the paintings and the movies get wrong, which is most of it. The condemned was scourged first, with leather thongs weighted with lead or bone, which drained blood and did part of the killing in advance. He then carried the patibulum, the crossbeam, roughly 50 kilograms, to the execution ground. Not the whole cross. A full cross weighed over 135 kilograms, and nobody carries that anywhere after a scourging. The uprights were permanent fixtures, planted at the execution ground, and reused victim after victim, the city gallows in post form. A placard called the titulus announced the crime. Victims were stripped naked. The loincloth in every painting is a modesty upgrade, and then tied or nailed, and ropes were common, because rope was cheap and worked fine. Most crosses were probably short. The feet hung barely off the ground, the face at the crowd's eye level, close enough to talk to, spit on, or be reached by dogs. Height was reserved for special visibility. Suetonius tells of a poisoner who claimed Roman citizenship to escape the cross. So the future emperor Galba ordered his cross whitewashed and built taller than the others, a citizen's upgrade. Suetonius collected imperial gossip for a living, so grain of salt included. But the joke only works if everyone knew the standard cross was short. Shape was improvised too. Seneca describes crosses of many kinds, some victims' head down, some impaled, some with arms stretched on a beam, and the T-shape is the best attested standard. Some crosses had a small seat peg. It was not a mercy. Support let the body last longer, and lasting was the product. When Rome wanted things over faster, executioners broke the victim's legs, which removed whatever support remained. Seneca argued in a letter that suicide was flatly preferable, describing the crucified as long, sickly, already deformed, drawing breath, amid long, drawn-out agony. That's the resident Stoic talking, the school whose whole brand was that pain doesn't matter. And here is the genuinely unsettling part. Modern medicine still doesn't know exactly what kills a crucified person. A French surgeon named Barbet argued asphyxiation, an idea he took partly from reports of prisoners dying in arm suspension punishments in World War I. The victim must push up on the nailed feet to exhale until exhaustion suffocates him. An American medical examiner named Zugibe strapped over 100 live volunteers to a cross in his New York lab, found they breathed fine with arms at realistic angles, and blamed shock and blood loss instead. Critics note his volunteers had foot supports, no wounds, and sessions under an hour, which is not quite the same experiment. A 2006 review in the Journal of the Royal Society of Medicine went through every candidate: asphyxia, shock, heart failure, dehydration, embolism, sepsis, and concluded that none is proven. Humanity's most common spectacular execution, and the mechanism is still an open research question. It killed by many roads. All of them were slow, and slow was the design spec, the price list. If you want to understand Rome in one document, there's an inscription from the town of Puteoli that explains everything. The Lex Libitina Puteolana is a municipal contracting law, and it includes the terms under which a private citizen could hire the town's undertaking contractor to crucify his own slave. The contractor supplied the post, the chains, the cords, and the floggers. The fee, 4 sesterces per worker, roughly the price of a jug of cheap wine per man. The same firm that handled the town's funerals handled its crucifixions on the same contract. It wasn't a dark ritual. It was an outsourced city service with a rate card, and the invoice survived when almost nothing else did. The same empire also ran history's pettiest annual ceremony. Once a year, in a rite called the Supplicia Canum, the Romans suspended live dogs on forked poles and paraded them through the city, past sacred geese seated on purple cushions. Why? Because in 390 BC, when the Gauls scaled the capital at night, the watchdogs failed to bark and the geese raised the alarm. Rome held that grudge against the entire dog species, with an annual public punishment, for centuries. Pliny reports it completely straight-faced. This is the civilization we're dealing with, organized, consistent, and clinically insane about honor. The missing bodies. So where is everybody? Tens of thousands of victims, and archaeology has found exactly 2. The reasons are grim and precise. Iron nails were pried out and reused, and, more eerily, prized as medicine. Pliny the Elder records that a nail from a crucifixion, wrapped in wool and worn around the neck, was a treatment for recurring fever. People wore execution hardware as a healing charm. Ropes rot without a trace, And most victims were never buried at all, because denial of burial was part of the sentence. Horace tells a slave he'll end up feeding crows on the cross, and Petronius built a whole story around a soldier posted to guard crucified bodies so families couldn't steal them for burial, which is why victim number 1 came from Jerusalem, where that Deuteronomy rule from earlier, burial before nightfall, applied even to the executed. In 1968, a construction crew broke into a rock-cut family tomb at Givat HaMiftar, holding the bones of 17 people, and inside an ossuary marked Jehohanan son of Hagkol lay a man in his mid-20s with an 11.5-centimeter iron nail still through his right heel bone. Under the nail head were traces of a small wooden washer, put there so the foot couldn't tear free. The nail had hit a knot in the olive wood post and bent, so it couldn't be pulled out, and whoever took him down had to cut the foot loose with the nail and a scrap of wood still attached. Every properly hammered nail in every crucifixion in history was salvaged. The one that reached us is the one the executioner botched. The science then corrected itself, which is worth telling straight. The first analysis in 1970 claimed his arms were nailed, both heels pinned together by one nail, legs broken. A re-examination in 1985 overturned nearly all of it. The nail was too short for 2 heels, the arms were probably tied with rope, and each heel was nailed separately to the sides of the post, legs straddling it. For 50 years, this one heel was the only skeletal evidence of crucifixion on the planet, and it showed a posture unlike almost every crucifixion painting ever made. The dating matters too. He died within a few decades of one very famous execution, in the same city, under the same authority. Victim number 2 turned up in a field in Fenstanton, Cambridgeshire, England, excavated in 2017 and published in 2021. Skeleton 4926, a local man of about 30, died sometime between 130 and 360 AD, with a 5-centimeter nail through his right heel, and a dent beside the hole shows the executioner missed on the first swing. His thin shin bones say he had been shackled for a long time before he died. Strangely, he was then buried with some care in a normal community cemetery, laid out with a wooden bier and 12 loose iron nails around him. Whoever he was, somebody local refused to treat him as garbage. He is the best preserved crucifixion victim in the world. His face has been forensically reconstructed, and his remains went on display at the British Museum. You can stand in London today and look a Roman crucifixion victim in the eye. A possible third case from Gavello, Italy, has the heel wound but no nail, and historians are still arguing about it. The most famous victim. Around the year 30 or 33, in Jerusalem, the Roman prefect Pontius Pilate crucified a preacher from Nazareth, and everything about the case matches the machine we've been describing. That the execution happened is not a religious claim. Tacitus, a Roman senator with zero sympathy for Christians, records it in his annals, and virtually all historians of antiquity, of any belief or none, accept it as fact. The titulus over the cross read, "King of the Jews," which is a sedition charge. Crucifixion was for rebels and slaves, and Rome was filing this one under rebel. Then the machine's own logic collapsed. Crucifixion was engineered to erase a person. No grave, no image, no polite word. For roughly 400 years, Christians themselves would not depict the crucifixion, because the shame Cicero described was still that radioactive. They drew a fish, an anchor, a shepherd. The boldest thing they managed was a tiny 2-letter monogram tucked into manuscripts, which some scholars read as a hidden pictogram of a figure on a cross, smuggled into the text where no outsider would notice. The earliest surviving picture of Jesus on the cross is enemy work, the Alexamenos graffito, scratched into a wall on the Palatine Hill around 200 AD, showing a worshipper before a crucified figure with a donkey's head, captioned, "Alexamenos worships his god." The donkey wasn't random. Roman gossip, repeated by Tacitus and Tertullian, claimed Jews and Christians worshipped a donkey god, so the artist was working with the standard slander of his day. Someone mocked a believer with a doodle, and the doodle outlived the empire. In a nearby room there's a second scratch, possibly the victim's reply. "Alexamenos is faithful." The world's first recorded comeback to a meme. The first reverent images only appear around 420 to 432 AD. An ivory panel now in the British Museum and a carved church door in Rome. And they show Christ alive, eyes open, untroubled. It took 4 centuries for anyone on the inside to dare draw the thing itself, and even then they refused to show him dead. A suffering, dying Christ on the cross took centuries more to enter art. The shame faded slowly, generation by generation, until the instrument became the brand. The band that boomeranged. Constantine, the first Christian emperor, is traditionally credited with abolishing crucifixion in the early 300s AD, out of reverence for the manner of Christ's death according to one ancient historian, or plain humanity according to another. Here's the fine print. No actual law survives. We know of the ban only from 2 historians' asides, and Rome kept a fork-shaped gibbet around as a replacement, so the cruelty changed shape more than it ended. And while Constantine was retiring the device, his own mother, Helena, was, by legend, in Jerusalem, hunting for the actual cross of Jesus as a holy relic. The legend is 4th century storytelling, not history, but it captures the whiplash perfectly. Within a single family, the cross went from unmentionable to priceless. Judicial crucifixion also outlived Rome by more than 1,000 years. Elsewhere, Persia's Sasanian Empire kept it in the repertoire, using it on, of all people, Christians. Japan developed haritsuke, where the condemned was tied to a frame, no nails, and killed with spear thrusts, 2 executioners alternating, the body left on display afterward. On the 5th of February 1597, 26 Christians, including 3 altar boys aged 12 and 13, were marched roughly 600 miles overland in winter and crucified at Nagasaki, and one of them, Paul Mickey, preached a sermon from his cross, forgiving his executioners. Japan's last recorded crucifixions happened in the 1860s, and the punishment only left the books with the Meiji reforms. Read that again. Crucifixion was still legal somewhere on Earth while the Transcontinental Railroad was being built. But the real ending is the inversion. Rome spent 500 years making the cross the filthiest object in its world, a swear word, a slave's death, a thing citizens shouldn't even think about. That branding failed so completely that the cross became the most reproduced image in human history, on churches, crowns, flags, and gold chains around billions of necks, and English still hands Rome's word the highest compliments in the language. Crucial, the crux of the matter. The empire's obscenity became the world's most recognized symbol, and after all the tens of thousands of crosses Rome raised, the entire physical evidence fits in your 2 hands, a pair of heel bones and a bent nail, preserved by a knot in the wood and a missed hammer swing. The only crucifixions we can touch survived because the executioners screwed up, and of all the people Rome ever nailed to wood, the one the whole world remembers was a carpenter.